Welcome to the Dan Sports Tips NFL Daily Fantasy Show for Week 2 of the NFL on DraftKings. I will be running through all you need to know for your daily fantasy games on DraftKings this week. I will be looking at stacks of the week for both offense and defense, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and finally defense and special teams units. For anybody that hasn't had the opportunity to sign up and play daily fantasy sports with DraftKings yet, I will pop a link in the description below this video that will enable you to do that today. If you are new to the game, you have a budget for your roster of $50,000. You need to construct a roster of one quarterback, two running backs, three wide receivers, a tight end, a flex position, and a defense or special teams unit. The stacks for the week this week for me, I'm going to begin with the obvious one, which is the New York Giants quarterback Eli Manning for $7,600 to wide receiver Odell Beckham for $9,500. This will be the highest used stack in my mind this weekend as the fade the New Orleans defense strategy continues in full effect and probably will do through the entire season. And it does put you into a difficult situation. The Saints defense doesn't look any better than last year. The Giants went into the Dome and I think scored 6 touchdowns as the teams combined for 101 points last season. In cash games, I think you have to play it. In tournaments, while the thought of not including Beckham and or Manning is quite scary, potentially, I would maybe use just Beckham, or alternatively, if you want to go a little bit more under the radar, stack Manning with one of the other receivers, Victor Cruz, or my preference, quarterback Eli Manning at $7,600, and wide receiver Sterling Shepard for $5,200. All the receivers are going to get their looks against this Saints defense. De facto number 2 on the Raiders last week, Michael Crabtree scored only 7 points less than Amari Cooper, and if that is how it shakes out for the Giants this week, you can certainly afford to sacrifice 7 points between Sterling Shepard and Odell Beckham for the cash you save, which is over $4,000 to strengthen the rest of your lineup. So actually my favourite stack in this game is Eli Manning to Sterling Shepard. The Carolina Panthers quarterback Cam Newton for $7,900 and wide receiver Kelvin Benjamin for $6,500. This one also could well be popular against the San Francisco 49ers. Benjamin returned from the injury last week against the excellent Broncos defense, swallowed up a huge percentage of targets on this Panthers team, catching 6 of 12 targets, including a touchdown, and scoring over 21 points. Against a far weaker 49ers unit at home in a game that does profile as a blowout for the Panthers, if Newton continues to feed Benjamin at the rate that he has, then these two could hook up for a huge combined number. Of course, Cam offers upside on his own with his legs and the running as well. If you're playing tournaments, an alternative would be quarterback Cam Newton, $7,900, and tight end Greg Olsen for $5,600. It is a solid stack. Newton does always look for his tight end often in the red zone. Olsen had 9 targets himself against the Broncos last week, catching 7 of them for 73 yards and a trip to the end zone, which is far more likely in this game, will boost those numbers even higher. The potential for the Panthers to sit Benjamin if the game gets out of hand, as he continues to his recovery from injury last year, does also add to potential upside for Olsen because he will become the number 1 target in this offense should they decide to do that if the game is out of hand in the second half. A much sneakier stack, I'm not sure how much this one will be used, is the Tennessee Titans. Quarterback Marcus Mariota for $6,000 and tight end Delaney Walker for $4,500. It's a much cheaper stack. It comes in combined at around 20% of budget. Now, usually I prefer to use stacks that are playing at home. That being said, I do think Detroit are going to get their points in this game. While Mariota is not Andrew Luck, he is often at his best when left to grip it and rip it. The Titans may well find that the flow of the game forces them away from the preferred running game of style that Coach Malarkey wants to employ and have to air it out in the second half. The Lions defense did allow the most tight end touchdowns in the NFL last season, and they allowed 3 more in week 1 to the Indianapolis Colts. A stack with Delaney Walker, who is the clear choice at tight end on this team and is one of the better players at the position for fantasy purposes, is likely an under the radar stack, especially in your tournament play this week. The final stack I'm looking at is the Arizona Cardinals. Quarterback Carson Palmer for $6,900 and wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald for $6,400. I thought Larry Fitz was the best player on the field Sunday night against the Patriots. He continues to defy age. He can complete the spectacular while never neglecting the routine. Does he ever drop a pass? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are an excellent run defence, and I will be fading David Johnson this week. They dare you to throw the ball on them, and Carson Palmer is a quarterback who can air it out and get good effect. Fitzgerald has proven his most reliable receiver, as evidenced by his 8 for 81 yards with 2 touchdowns on 10 targets in week 1 against the Patriots. If you want to play a more risky version that could be more under the radar, quarterback Carson Palmer for 6,900 to wide receiver Michael Floyd for 5,900. Floyd caught 3 of his 7 targets for 61 yards in the opener. He will certainly have his opportunities against a Buccaneers secondary that has questions to answer. The Cardinals will be smarting from the defeat in the opener. They'll be looking to put down a marker in the game that could develop into a shootout potentially if Tampa turn up and play as well offensively as they did against, I think it was the Falcons in week 1. Floyd may well benefit in this game as well. Looking at our defensive stacks, there are 2 obvious defensive stacks this week. The better of the 2, arguably, is the Denver Broncos. Running back CJ Anderson with the Broncos defense and special teams. Anderson's 6,800. The Broncos defense is 3,600. This also comes in combined at about 20% of budget. But Anderson did gain 4.6 yards per carry, including on 20 touches, excluding his work as a receiver against a very good Carolina unit, and will now get to face the Colts at home and their poor excuse for a rush defense. I would expect the Colts to win I would expect the Broncos, to win the game, despite the Colts beating them last year. Anderson will be heavily used to milk the clock as the Colts defence starts to huff and puff at altitude in the 4th quarter. He should up his yards per carry from last week, while his carry should at least equal the total of last week. I would expect a 3-figure output as the Lions running backs Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick combined for more than 5 yards per carry on the ground and over 100 yards against this same Colts unit last week. The other stack is running back Jonathan Stewart for 5,400 and the Carolina Panthers defense and special teams for 3,900. In an expected blowout for the heavily favoured Panthers at home, Stewart, should he be fully recovered from the injury that he picked up in week 1, should get a heavy workload in the 4th quarter. He was able to gain 4.3 yards per carry against the Broncos in the opener. The 49ers unit do not match the Broncos on talent level, although that front 7 is underrated. The defense and special teams also sells itself with excellent kick return potential and also turnovers from Blaine Gabbert, who looked distinctly average to me despite the easy win on Monday night. Quarterbacks that I would be considering to use other than the ones in the stacks this week would be Matthew Stafford of the Detroit Lions for 7,300 against the Titans team that actually did a pretty good job week 1. Stafford is likely to find some success at home. Firstly, he is much better at the position than Sean Hill, who faced the Titans for the Vikings last week. Stafford has cut down on turnovers drastically in the simplified version of the offense under Jim Bob Cooter. It showed as he completed 31 of his 39 passes for 340 yards and 3 touchdowns last week in the shootout with the Colts. With reliable receiving options both out wide and in the backfield, the Lions signal caller should be looked at as a solid play with reasonable upside for the price this week. There are a host of running backs that I think are usable as well. I'd take a shot on Latavius Murray of Oakland for 5,700. There is some risk as well as upside with Murray. He averaged 4.2 yards per carry in the victory over the Saints defence last week, but that is the Saints defence, and so he should be averaging that against them. He was a product of volume last year. That continued last week. He did receive the bulk of the carries. The good news is that at home in a winnable game against Atlanta, there should be more carries to go around this week for the Raiders running backs, and the Falcons run defence is nothing special, highlighted by poor tackling at the second level. So there is every chance, if Murray can break one, that he could go a long way. That, however, is a big if, as the line will need to block well, which it can do for a running back who averaged just 1.9 yards after contact in games last season. Rashad Jennings of the New York Giants for 5,600. Jennings is the workhorse back of this Giants team. He averaged 4.2 yards a carry last week against the Cowboys. That can be expected to increase against the hapless Saints. He would also want to be the short yardage back at the goal line. So if the expected shootout does occur, he could easily notch a score or 2 in this game, and Jennings for 5,600 looks a solid play. Danny Woodhead of the San Diego Chargers for 5,200. Long the darling of the fantasy player in the PPR format that we're using here on DraftKings. Woodhead saw just the lion's share of the carries in week 1 over Melvin Gordon. 16 for Woodhead, 14 for Gordon. He was also more successful with a 5.6 yards per carry to Gordon's 4.1. Adding the receiving, and Woodhead had easily the more successful day in fantasy despite Gordon's 2 touchdowns, which were his first in the NFL in the regular season. Expect to see plenty of Woodhead again for the reasons that he's on the field when they're behind, and the Jags do figure to score some points in this game. Keenan Allen is now out of the game, so there are some for the season, so there are extra targets to be going around, and it would appear on the ratio of what we saw in week 1 and the back end of last season that Woodhead is the preferred option at running back for the San Diego Chargers coaching team. And finally, Theo Riddick of Detroit for 4,300 looks an excellent flyer at the price with some serious upside. As displayed in the opener against that terrible Colts defence, he's capable and elusive with the ball in his hands in space. The Lions clearly want to keep him involved in the offence. He caught all 5 of his targets for 63 yards and a touchdown, as well as getting 7 carries in comparison to fellow running back Amir Abdullah's 12 in, a pretty close split in the game. He is elusive enough to take a catch a long way, giving you the upside for the long touchdown at virtually any time. Wide receivers this week, Julian Edelman of the New England Patriots for 6,200. Edelman caught all 7 of his targets against the Cardinals last week. He's proven to be a reliable and favoured target of Tom Brady down the years, and now also Jimmy Garoppolo. If Gronk misses this game, and that's still up in the air as I'm recording this, then the upside increases further against a Miami unit that has had issues covering slot receivers, when Edelman will likely line up plenty in the slot this week. He does move around the formations. Wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders of Denver for $6,000. I've seen enough of Trevor Siemian to believe that he can throw. With Demaryius Thomas hobbled and against a blatantly poor Colts defense, Sanders should see his fair share of the workload and likely some success this week. He had the most targets of the Broncos receivers last week, and I think Siemian can take the training wheels off a little bit against these Colts defensive backs, having survived the Black Cats last week. Wide receiver Stephon Diggs of the Minnesota Vikings for 5,100. They've got to throw the ball at some point. Potentially quite a lot if the Packers get a lead. Diggs is a de facto number 2 on the depth chart, but he was the most targeted receiver in week 1. I think he's clearly the best option on the Vikings, as he gathered in 7 of those targets for 103 yards against the Tennessee Titans. Tavon Austin of the Los Angeles Rams for 4,900. Look, Austin was horrible in week 1. He had 13 yards on 12 targets, only catching 4 of them. The thing to focus on here is the targets. He had 12 targets. We know that they need to get the ball into Austin's hands if they're going to have any form of success. We know he can be useful when they get the ball in his hands. Let's focus on the targets and the expected better production from the target level this week, even if it is against the Seahawks defence, and not overreact to a single bad game. Travis Benjamin of the San Diego Chargers for 4,400. An expected uptick in targets due to the absence of Keenan Allen for the rest of the year. The legitimacy of Benjamin, as we've seen, as a deep threat down the years, and the price makes him simply too cheap, and he can be expected to produce against the Jaguars at a reasonable rate for a receiver at 4,400. And finally, Cole Beasley of the Dallas Cowboys for 3,200. Beasley emerged as something of a favourite target in week 1 against the Giants for Dak Prescott. He got 12 targets, which was most among wide receivers, catching 8 of them for 65 yards. This could be an anomaly of a single week. We don't know. It is obviously only week 2. Well, Beasley could actually have a nice role in the Dak Prescott-led Cowboys as an outlet in the face of the rush in the slot. At 3,200, it's certainly worth chancing for the money it gives you to pay up elsewhere in your lineups. Looking at tight ends this week, I'm going to start along the same vein as I finish wide receivers. Jason Witten of the Dallas Cowboys. Pretty much like I said for Cole Beasley, Prescott threw safe and short mostly. The beneficiaries of that were Witten and Beasley. Witten caught 9 of his team-leading 14 targets. There is no reason to expect a decrease in the workload for the reliable tight end who is always on the field and always there to make the catch when the quarterback needs to get rid of it, whether it be Romo or Prescott. Tight end Gary Barnidge of Cleveland for 4,000. Quite simply, when Barnidge was in the lineup and Josh McCown was under centre last year, there was statistically no better tight end in fantasy football than Gary Barnidge. None. Not even Gronk. Josh McCown starts at quarterback for the Browns this week, just in case you didn't know. And tight end Jacob Tammany of the Atlanta Falcons for 2,900. The Raiders had fair issues covering tight ends last year. Tammany had a solid opener this year, catching 6 of 8 targets for 51 yards. I'm not convinced of the coverage skills of the linebackers being sufficient enough for the Oakland Raiders. They've got a couple of very good pass-rushing outside linebackers there in Mack and Bruce Irvin, but I'm yet to see that they can cover and fix the issues against the tight end last year this year. So I think Tammy for 2,900 could be a sneaky under the radar play that will be very low owned as well. And finally, moving on to defense and special teams, I'm going to take the Los Angeles Rams for 3,300. The Seattle defensive line is something of a mess. The team always starts slowly. The line seems to get better throughout the year. Despite not showing it on Monday night, the Rams do have a capable pass rush that gave the Seahawks fits last year. They also unveiled their trick special teams plays. They've had success against the Seahawks in recent seasons, a team that they've always played hard, and I think they'll certainly be low owned after the Monday night fiasco. And I think the Rams defense could put up some points this week, certainly on sacks alone. That is what I have got for you this week. Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen in the NFL this week, who you'll be using in your lineups. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to my channel, give me a follow at dansports.tips on Twitter, and I will be back next week. See you later.